From now on, I want your paycheck sent to my account, my son declared, sliding a stack of bank forms across my kitchen table. I smiled and agreed that night he and his wife came to my house to celebrate their victory. But the moment they walked in, they screamed in shock. The house was not just empty, it was not mine anymore. Before I continue this story, please subscribe to the channel and let me know which city you are watching from. In the comments below, your support means the world to this old man. My name is Victor Cross, and at 72 years old, I thought I had seen everything. Life could throw at me. I spent 40 years as a chief engineer for a major aerospace company, designing landing gear systems that had to withstand thousands of pounds of pressure without cracking. I knew about stress, I knew about load-bearing limits, and I knew how to spot a structural failure long before the metal actually snapped. But as I sat at my mahogany dining table that rainy Tuesday evening in Seattle, realized I had missed the most dangerous fracture of all, the one right inside my own family. The sound of a ceramic plate sliding against the wood was the only thing that broke the heavy silence, Brandon. My 38-year-old son had just pushed a piece of paper toward me with the casual arrogance of a man playing a winning poker hand. I looked down at the document. The bold black letters at the top seemed to vibrate under the dim chandelier light. Direct deposit authorization form. I did not reach for my reading glasses. I did not need them to understand what was happening. I looked up at Brandon. His face was smooth, unlined, and handsome, in a way that often opened doors for him that should have remained shut. He was wearing a suit that I knew cost more than my first car, a suit I had likely paid for indirectly through the endless bailouts I had given him over the years. "What is this, Brandon?" I asked, my voice steady, though I could feel my heart rate climbing a slow, treacherous ascent in my chest. "It is just some paperwork," Dad Brandon said, taking a sip of the red wine I had been saving for a special occasion. He did not even look me in the eye. He was looking at his fingernails, inspecting them as if they were more interesting than his father's. "Dignity, we were going through your mail, and we noticed you missed the electric bill last month just by a few days. But still, it is a sign of what I asked." Setting my fork down carefully next to my untouched pot roast, "That you are slipping, Dad," Brandon said, and there was a fake sweetness to his tone that made my stomach turn a patronizing lilt that you would use on a toddler or a stubborn golden retriever. "Me and Tiffany, we talked about it, and we think it is time for me to take over the burden of your finances, just to keep you safe, you know, so you do not forget anything important or get scammed by people on the internet." I looked across the table at Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was 30 years old, and in the 5 years she had been married to my son, I do not think I had ever seen her look up from her phone for more than 2 minutes at a time. She was scrolling through Instagram, her thumb flicking upward in a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. The blue light from the screen illuminated her face, making her look cold and detached, like a marble statue that had learned how to spend money. "The bill was not missed, Brandon," I said clearly. Keeping my anger on a tight leash, I paid it online on the 12th. The paper bill you saw was just the confirmation statement I printed for my records. I still manage my own books just fine. Brandon sighed, a long, exaggerated exhalation of breath that suggested I was being incredibly difficult just by existing. "Come on. Dad, do not be stubborn. It is not just the bill. It is everything. You are sitting on a huge pile of cash from your pension and those consulting checks you get every month. $12,000 is a lot for one old man living alone in a 4-bedroom house. We just want to help you manage it, streamline it. You sign this form, your checks go into a joint account that I control, and I will give you an allowance." An allowance, the word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. He was talking about giving me an allowance from my own money I had earned through decades of 60-hour weeks, missed birthdays and sleepless nights, worrying about fuselage integrity. Tiffany finally looked up from her phone. She popped a piece of gum in her mouth and chewed loudly before speaking. Her voice was high-pitched and grated on my nerves, like metal on metal. "Look, Victor, you should be grateful, honestly. Most people your age are already rotting away in some state, Run nursing home smelling like bleach and boiled cabbage. Brandon is trying to keep you here in your house, allowing you to keep your little dignity, and you are acting like we are robbing you. Sign the paper so we can go home. I have a lash appointment in the morning. I looked at my hands resting on the table. They were not the smooth, manicured hands of my son. They were weathered. There was a small scar on my left thumb from a soldering iron accident in 1985. My knuckles were swollen from arthritis, a souvenir from years of gripping wrenches and drafting pencils. These hands had built things. They had repaired engines in freezing rain. They had held my late wife Kate when she took her last breath, and they had signed the check for $80,000 to pay for Brandon's private university tuition. I remembered that day vividly. Brandon had begged me for that tuition, saying it was his dream to study business. I had dipped into my retirement savings. I had driven my old Ford truck for another 10 years, instead of buying a new one just so he could walk around campus without student loans hanging over his head. And now those same hands were being asked to sign away my freedom to the boy I had sacrificed everything for. The silence stretched out again, tension tightening around the room like a cable pulled to its breaking point. I looked at the house around me, the crown molding I had installed myself, the fireplace where Kate and I used to drink cocoa on Christmas Eve. Every inch of this place was earned, paid for with sweat and integrity. And now two people who had never built anything in their lives were sitting at my table demanding the keys to the kingdom. I picked up the form. My hand was not shaking. I made sure of that. I looked at it one last time. Then I looked at Brandon. I said the word was quiet, but it landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. Brandon blinked, his fake smile faltering for a second. "Excuse me." I said no. I pushed the paper back across the table toward him. "I am not signing this. I am not senile, Brandon. And I am certainly not incompetent. I manage my money because it is mine. If I need help, I will hire an accountant, not a failed real estate agent who thinks cryptocurrency is a retirement plan." The air in the room changed instantly. The fake concern evaporated, replaced by something raw and ugly. Brandon's face flushed a deep, angry red. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump and the wine glasses rattle. "Stop acting like you are still the big boss here." "Old man," he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "You are 72 years old. You are alone. Mom is dead. And you are just taking up space in this big house, hoarding money while your family struggles? Do you have any idea how selfish you are looking?" "We are trying to help you," Tiffany chimed in, her voice dripping with venom. But now she had put her phone down, her eyes narrowed like a predator spotting a wounded animal. "You do not get it. Do you, Victor? You are losing it. We see the signs. Everyone sees the signs. You forget things. You repeat stories. You are becoming a liability." I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I drew myself up to my full height of 6 feet. I might have been old, but I was not frail. I still walked 2 miles every morning. I still consulted for the firm on critical safety protocols. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Brandon stood up too, knocking his chair over. He leaned over the table, getting right in my face. I could smell the expensive wine on his breath, and beneath that, the sour smell of desperation. "You can kick us out tonight, Dad," he spat the word. Dad out like it was a curse word, but this is not over if you do not sign that paper. Voluntarily, I will make you sign it. Do not make me use legal measures. Do not make me go to a judge and have you declared incompetent, because I will do it. I have friends in the court system, and I will testify that you are a danger to yourself, and when I win, and I will win, you won't just lose your money, you will lose this house, and you will end up in that state nursing home Tiffany was talking about. Think about that while you sleep in this empty house tonight. He grabbed Tiffany's hand and stormed toward the front door at the threshold. He turned back one last time, his face twisted into a sneer that looked nothing like the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders. "You have until next week, Dad. Do the smart thing, or I will destroy you." The door slammed shut, shaking the framed photos on the wall. I stood there alone in the silence, the echo of his threat bouncing around the room. My heart was pounding against my ribs, not from fear, but from a profound, heartbreaking realization. The son I had raised was gone, dead, and buried under layers of greed and entitlement. The man who had just left my house was a stranger, a dangerous stranger who wanted to strip me of everything I had left. I walked over to the window and watched their car tail lights fade into the rain. They thought they had terrified me. They thought I was just a helpless old man who would crumble under the threat of a court order. They thought they held all the cards. I looked down at my hands. Again, the hands of an engineer. I slowly clenched them into fists. An engineer does not panic when he sees a crack in the structure. He assesses the damage. He calculates the variables, and then he reinforces the foundation. Brandon wanted a war. He wanted to play games with the law, and with my life well. He had forgotten one thing. He might have studied business, but I studied physics, and for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I was not going to sleep tonight. I walked to my study and pulled out my phone, not to call him back, but to call the one person I knew could help me bury him. Ethan Shaw, my old lawyer, was about to get a very interesting late-night call. The game was on, and my son had no idea he had just made the first move in a match. He was destined to lose because he forgot that before you tear down a building, you better make sure the architect is not still inside wiring the explosives. The 3 days that followed that dinner were not just difficult. They were a calculated assault on my reality, designed to dismantle the mind of a man who had made a career out of precision. It started the very next morning with a smell that every engineer knows instantly, the thick, rotten egg stench of mercaptan, the chemical additive they put in natural gas. So you know when there is a leak. I woke up at 6 in the morning, my internal clock still set to the rhythm of the factory floor, and the smell hit me before I even opened my eyes. Panic is not something I indulge in, but urgency is different. I threw off my covers and rushed down the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. The smell was stronger in the hallway, sickeningly sweet and heavy. I ran into the kitchen, and there it was. The front left burner of my gas range was turned just enough to hiss, but not enough to light. I reached out and twisted the knob to the off position, my hand trembling slightly, not from age but from adrenaline. I stood there staring at the black grate, knowing with absolute certainty that I had wiped that stove down and checked the knobs before I went up to bed at 10. It was part of my routine. Lock the front door, check the back door, wipe the counters, check the stove. I had done it every night for 40 years without fail. The front door opened before the gas had even cleared. Brandon walked in wearing his jogging clothes, looking far too awake for that hour, and far too convenient. "Whoa, Dad. Do you smell that?" he asked, waving his hand in front of his face, wrinkling his nose in that theatrical way he had developed recently. "Jesus. Did you leave the stove on all night?" "I did not leave it on," I said, my voice raspy from sleep. "I checked it." "I always check it." Brandon walked over and put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look comforting but felt like a weight pushing me down. "Dad, come on, look at the dial. It was on. We are lucky the whole house did not blow up. This is exactly what Tiffany and I were talking about. You are forgetting things, dangerous things." I looked at him, searching his eyes for a shred of the boy. I had taught to ride a bike, but all I saw was a flat, reflective surface hiding something dark underneath. Did not argue with him then. I just nodded slowly, feeling a cold knot of suspicion tightening in my gut. Because I knew something. He did not know that specific burner, the front left one, had a sticky igniter. I never used it. I always used the back right burner for my evening tea. If I had made tea, I would have used the back burner. If I had cleaned the stove, I would have checked. All of them, the data did not match the conclusion. The next incident happened 24 hours later. I came down for breakfast and felt a draft chilling the air in the living room. The back door, the one leading to the patio, was standing wide open. Rain was blowing in, soaking the hardwood floor. I had refinished myself, 10 years ago, a puddle had formed near the rug, threatening to stain the wool. I stared at the open door, my mind racing. I had locked the deadbolt. I remembered the click. I remembered the feel of the cold metal against my thumb. I rushed over and slammed it shut, engaging the lock and pulling on it 3 times to be sure. Brandon called me 10 minutes later. He did not even come over this time. He just called as if he had a camera watching me. "Hey, Dad, just checking in," he said. His voice breezy. Tiffany said, "She drove by and saw your back door open. Are you airing the place out in this weather?" I did not leave it open. "Brandon," I said, gripping the phone so hard the plastic creaked. "Someone must have opened it. Dad, who would open it?" he asked, his tone dropping into that soft, pitying register again. "You are wandering at night, aren't you? You are sleepwalking, or you are getting confused about whether you are coming or going. This is the dementia, Dad. It starts with small things, keys, stoves, doors, and then one day you walk out into traffic. We need to get that paperwork signed so I can hire a nurse to watch you at night." I hung up the phone. I did not want him to hear the shake in my breath. For a split second, I doubted myself. That is the power of gaslighting. It makes you question the very ground you stand on. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. Could I be losing it? Could my brain, the instrument I had relied on for complex aerodynamic calculations, be failing me so catastrophic? But the engineer in me rejected the hypothesis. Isolation of variables. I told myself, if the system is failing, check the inputs. The final blow to my sanity came on the third day. I was looking for my wallet. I keep it in a small leather valet tray on the dresser, a gift from Kate. I put it there every single day when I change out of my trousers. I reached for it, and my hand grasped nothing but empty air. I searched the bedroom, I searched the bathroom, I checked the pockets of every pair of pants I owned. Panic began to set in, a different kind of panic. This time, the frantic, helpless feeling of a man losing control over his own existence. I went downstairs, tearing cushions off the sofa, checking the coat rack. Nothing. I went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water to calm down. I opened the refrigerator, and there it was, sitting on the middle shelf, right next to the carton of milk, my brown leather wallet, chilled and covered in a light layer of condensation. I stared at it for a long time. The absurdity of it was almost funny. In a dark, twisted way, putting a wallet in the fridge is the cliché. The textbook example everyone uses when they joke about Alzheimer's. It was too perfect, too script-written. Brandon and Tiffany came over that evening for a surprise visit, bringing takeout Chinese food. I did not want. I showed them the wallet. "See?" Brandon said, pointing at the cold leather with a French fry. "That is classic behavior." "Dad." "Object, displacement. You are losing track of context. Your brain is misfiring. You are trying to keep your money safe, so you put it in the fridge because that is where you keep food safe. It makes sense to a confused mind." Tiffany nodded, sipping her diet soda, looking around the kitchen with a critical eye. "You know, Victor, my grandmother did this right before she burned her house down, just saying. We are only trying to protect you from yourself." I sat there listening to them construct a narrative of my decline brick by brick. But the mortar was wet, and the alignment was off. Then came the digital silence. I tried to watch the evening news after they left, a ritual I enjoyed. I turned on the smart TV Brandon had insisted I buy last year and pressed the Netflix button. An error message popped up, incorrect password. I tried again, carefully, typing in the password I had used for months, cross 1952, nothing, incorrect password. I tried to connect my tablet to the Wi-Fi to reset it, connection failed, incorrect password. I called Tiffany, she was the one who had set up the network. "Originally, Tiffany, the internet is down, it says the password is wrong." "Oh yeah," she said, sounding bored and annoyed through the speaker. "Dad, you changed it yesterday, remember? You called me and said you were worried. Hackers were stealing your signal, so you changed it to something complicated. I wrote it down for you and put it on the fridge, didn't you see it?" I walked to the fridge. There was a yellow sticky note there in handwriting. That was definitely not mine. It was a string of random characters that looked like nonsense. I did not change the password. "Tiffany," I said, my voice firm. "You did, Dad," she sighed loud and long. "Look, if you are going to be difficult about this, I cannot help you. Maybe you should just read a book. Screens are bad for your condition anyway." The line went dead. She had hung up on me. I stood in the silent house, the TV screen glowing blue with the error message offering no connection to the outside world. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me, but I forced it down. I forced it into the engine of my mind and used it as fuel. They were not just trying to get my money, they were trying to delete me. They were trying to overwrite Victor Cross. The engineer with Victor Cross, the senile invalid. They wanted me to doubt my memory so much that I would voluntarily hand over the pen and let them write the end of my story. I walked upstairs to my study and unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk. I took out a fresh field notebook, the kind with grid paper and a hard waterproof cover. I had used these for decades to track project milestones and structural anomalies. I sat down and clicked my pen. This was not a diary. Diaries are for feelings. This was a log. A log is for data. Entry 1. I wrote the date and time 2100 hours, incident Wi-Fi. Password changed remotely, subject claimed I did so, lack of memory. Confirmed negative variable. Tiffany has admin access to router. Entry 2 2110 hours wallet, found in refrigerator. Temperature of leather suggests it was placed there approximately 2 hours prior, consistent with time of Brandon and Tiffany arrival. For drop-off of laundry. Entry 3 stove incident, previous night, no residue of tea or food preparation. On burner grate, confirming non-use logical conclusion, manual manipulation by external party. I wrote until my hand cramped. I cataloged every strange occurrence, every misplaced item, every conversation, and every lie as the ink filled the page. A pattern emerged, clear and undeniable as a blueprint. This was a siege they were cutting. My supply lines, targeting my communications and sabotaging my infrastructure. They were counting on my emotional vulnerability. They were counting on the fact that a father wants to trust his son, but they had forgotten who they were dealing with. I was not just a father, I was a man who had spent his life preventing catastrophic failure by spotting the smallest hairline fractures. They thought they were breaking me down, but all they were doing was showing me exactly where to reinforce the walls. I closed the notebook and put it in my breast pocket right over my heart. It was time to stop reacting and start testing. I needed outside verification. I needed a stress test that they could not manipulate. The next morning I would not go to the doctor they recommended. I would not call the tech support number Tiffany gave me. I was going to initiate a counter-operation, and it would begin with the one person in this world who understood the value of a paper trail as much as I did, my old lawyer. Evelyn Shaw. She had helped me patent a hydraulic valve in the 90s. She could certainly help me patent a trap for two greedy children who thought they were smarter than the man who taught them how to walk. I turned off the lights in the house, but I did not go to sleep. I sat in the dark listening to the rain, and for the first time in days, I did not feel confused. I felt focused. The data was in, the conclusion was drawn now. It was time to design the solution. The ambush came 2 days later on a Saturday morning when the neighborhood was quiet, and the only sound was the hum of lawnmowers in the distance. I was in the garage organizing my tool chest, a ritual that usually brought me peace, wiping down the chrome vanadium wrenches and aligning the screwdrivers by size, but the peace was shattered by the sound of tires crunching on my gravel driveway. Not one car, but two. I walked out of the garage, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. Brandon was getting out of his SUV, but he was not alone. A man I had never seen before was stepping out of a silver sedan. He was short, balding and wearing a tweed jacket that looked too heavy for the season, carrying a thick leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. I stood my ground. At the edge of the garage door, my boots planted firmly on the concrete. I did not smile, I did not wave, I just waited for the variable to present itself. "Hey, Dad!" Brandon called out, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. Sorry to drop in without calling, but I brought a friend I wanted you to meet. This is Dr. Eris. The stranger stepped forward, extending a hand that was soft and damp. Mr. Cross, it is a pleasure to meet you. Brandon has told me so much about you. What a lovely property you have here, very secluded. I did not shake his hand. I looked at Brandon, ignoring the stranger completely. Who is this Brandon, and why is he here on a Saturday morning? Brandon shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable under my stare. Oh, he is just a friend of Tiffany, actually. He is a specialist in geriatric cognitive health. We were just talking about how much stress you have been under lately, with the bills and the confusion. And I thought it would be great if Dr. Eris could just have a casual chat with you. You know, just to put everyone's mind at ease. A casual chat. I felt the anger flare up in my chest, hot and sharp, like a welding torch. This was not a social call. This was an evaluation. An ambush designed to generate a medical paper trail right in my own living room. I am not interested in chatting with your friends. Brandon. I said, my voice low and steady, and I certainly do not need a cognitive evaluation. I suggest you both get back in your cars and leave before I call the sheriff for trespassing. Dr. Eris cleared his throat, pulling a pen from his pocket, clicking it nervously. Mr. Cross, please, there is no need for hostility. We are just concerned about your well-being. Brandon tells me you have been exhibiting some signs of paranoia and memory loss, specifically regarding financial obligations and household safety. Getting confused about stove knobs and passwords is very common at your age, but it can be a sign of something that needs management. He was talking to me like I was a toddler who had refused to eat his peas. His tone was condescending, dripping with that fake medical sympathy that masks a cold calculation. I took a step forward, and the doctor took a step back, instinctively. My memory is fine. Doctor, I said, looking him dead in the eye, I remember that the igniter on my stove has been faulty since 2019. I remember that my Wi-Fi password was changed remotely on Thursday at 9 p.m., and I remember that my son is currently standing on the driveway of a house he did not pay for, trying to declare his father incompetent so he can get access to a bank account. He did not earn. Does that sound like memory loss to you? Or does it sound like a detailed observation of a hostile takeover? Brandon's face went pale, then red. Dad. Stop it. You are embarrassing yourself. This is exactly what I mean. The paranoia, the aggression. You are acting crazy. I am acting like a man who sees exactly what is happening. I pointed to the street. Get out. Brandon, and take your quack doctor with you if you want to evaluate someone. Evaluate yourself for a lack of moral spine. Dr. Eris looked at Brandon, shaking his head slightly. I think we should go. Mr. Cross appears. To be in a state of high agitation, we cannot conduct a proper assessment in this environment. You are right about one thing, I said. I am agitated now, leave. They retreated to their cars, but Brandon did not get in. He waited until the doctor had backed out of the driveway, then he turned back to me. The mask of the concerned son was gone completely, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated malice. He walked back up the driveway, stopping just out of arm reach. You think you are so smart? He spat the words out, his eyes narrowing into slits. You think you won because you chased him off, but all you did was prove my point. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, holding it up like a weapon. You have until Monday. Dad. Monday morning at 9 a.m. What happens Monday? I asked, keeping my face stone cold. This is a draft for a petition of conservatorship, Brandon said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. If you do not sign the voluntary power of attorney and the direct deposit transfer by Monday morning, I am filing this with the probate court. I have the doctor's statement about your aggression. I have Tiffany testimony about the stove and the open doors, and I have the missed bill. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive cologne and fear. Do you know what happens when I file this? The court freezes your assets, Dad. Everything. Your accounts, your cards, even your ability to sell this house. The judge will appoint a temporary guardian. And guess who that is going to be? Me. And once I am your guardian, you do not get to make decisions anymore. You go where I say you go, and I say you are going to a facility where you cannot hurt yourself. I stared at him, feeling the blood drain from my face, not from fear, but from the sheer shock of hearing my own flesh and blood threaten to imprison me. You would put me in a home, I asked quietly, just to hear him say it. I will put you where you are safe, Brandon said, and by safe I mean somewhere cheap, because I am not spending my inheritance on a 5-star resort for a man who won't even help his own family. Inheritance, the word, hung in the air between us, naked and ugly. He was already counting the money, he was already spending it in his head. Just then, Tiffany's car pulled up to the curb. She had been waiting down the street, watching. She got out and walked up the driveway, her heels clicking on the asphalt. She did not look at me, she looked past me at the house. Did he sign it? She asked Brandon, ignoring my presence entirely. Not yet, Brandon said. But he will, he knows what the alternative is. Tiffany walked past us and stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at the house. Her eyes were not looking at the architecture or the garden, she was looking at the windows. At the heavy oak front door, she was calculating. You know, Brandon, she said, her voice dreamy and detached. If we have to put him in the facility, we should really think about staging this place. Quickly, the market is hot right now. That antique grandfather clock in the hall alone would fetch $5,000 at auction, and the rug in the living room. The Persian one that is easily another 10. I felt a cold chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the wind. She was not just talking about selling the house, she was talking about stripping it. She was talking about selling my life, piece by piece, to the highest bidder. That clock was a wedding gift from your mother, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Tiffany turned to me and shrugged. Well, if you are in a home, you won't need to tell time, will you, Victor? Besides, someone has to pay for your care, and the state facilities are so depressing. We are just being practical. She looked back at the house, her eyes hungry, almost glowing with greed. And I realized then that this was not just about my monthly paycheck anymore. This was not just about covering some gambling debt or a few credit card bills. They wanted it all. They wanted liquidate my entire existence. They wanted to erase 40 years of hard work, strip the assets, sell the memories, and use the cash to fuel their vanity. They saw me not as a father or a human being, but as an obstacle, a stubborn old lock on a treasure chest that they were determined to smash open. Brandon stepped up next to her, putting his arm around her waist, presenting a united front of entitlement. Monday morning, Dad, he said again. Monday morning, or the sheriff comes to escort you out for your own safety. Think about it. They turned and walked back to his car, leaving me standing in the driveway with grease on my hands and a hole in my heart, where my love for my son used to be. I watched them drive away, and the silence returned to the neighborhood. But the peace did not inside me. The gears were turning faster than they ever had before. The engineer was analyzing the stress load, and the conclusion was terrifying. The structure could not hold. I had 48 hours before. They filed a motion that would strip me of my rights 48 hours before a judge who did not know me might believe the lies of a well-dressed son and a paid-off doctor. 48 hours to save my life. I looked at the house, my fortress, my sanctuary. I looked at the garden Kate had planted. I looked at the garage where I built things that flew. They wanted a war. They wanted to play the legal game. They thought they had the leverage because they were young, and I was old. They thought they had the leverage because they were ruthless, and I was decent. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They assumed that because I was old, I was slow. They assumed that because I was a father, I would not strike back. I turned and walked back into the garage. I picked up the rag and finished wiping my hands. Then I reached for the phone on the wall. I was not going to wait for Monday. I was not going to wait for the court. I was going to make a preemptive strike that would shake the ground. Oh. Beneath their feet, I dialed the number I knew by heart. Evelyn Shaw, my attorney, Evelyn, I said when she answered, her voice warm and familiar. Victor, she said, sensing the tone in my voice immediately. What is wrong? I need you to clear your schedule for the weekend, I said, looking at the empty spot in the driveway where my son had stood. Why? What has happened? She asked. I am initiating the scorched earth protocol, I said, my voice flat and hard. I need to liquidate everything, Evelyn, everything, the stocks, the bonds, the savings, and I need to do it before Monday morning. There was a silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of a chair scraping as she sat up straighter. Did Brandon threaten you? He did not just threaten me, Evelyn. He declared war. He is coming for the house. He is coming for my freedom. Then we will make sure there is nothing left for him to take, she said, her voice turning sharp and professional. Meet me at my office in an hour. Bring every deed, every title, and every statement you have. I hung up the phone and looked around the garage one last time. I was going to burn it all down, metaphorically speaking. I was going to dismantle my own life bolt by bolt, just so they could not inherit the scraps. It was time to show my son that the old man still knew how to build a trap, and this one was going to be inescapable. I watched the red taillights of Brandon's SUV fade into the gray drizzle of the afternoon, and for a moment, I just stood there on the porch. Letting the cold mist hit my face, it felt good. It felt real. Unlike the performance I had just given. I had played the part of the defeated old man perfectly. I had slumped my shoulders. I had let my voice waver, and I had pleaded for just a few more days to get my affairs in order. Please just give me the weekend to say goodbye to the house, I had said, and I saw the look of triumph in Brandon's eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the fortress had crumbled, but as soon as their car turned the corner at the end of the block, I straightened my spine. The tremor in my hands vanished instantly, replaced by the steady calm of a man who is about to defuse a bomb. I walked back into the house, locked the door, and went straight to the kitchen. I poured the rest of the cold coffee down the sink and rinsed the cup, drying it, and placing it back in the cupboard exactly where it belonged. Order, discipline, routine. These were the things that kept me sane, and they were the weapons I would use to destroy the chaos my son had brought into my life. I did not go to the bedroom to rest. Instead, I went to the garage and pulled the tarp off my 1978 Ford F-150. It was an old truck, but like me, it was built to last. I maintained the engine myself, and I knew every bolt and piston in it. I climbed into the cab, the smell of old leather and motor oil, greeting me like an old friend. I turned the key and the engine roared to life, a deep throat rumble that sounded like anger. Given a voice, I backed out of the driveway. Not looking at the house, I did not need to look at it to know it was in danger. I drove through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle, heading downtown to a building that had stood since before the tech boom changed the skyline. I was going to see Evelyn Shaw. Evelyn was not just my lawyer. She was the daughter of my old mentor at the aerospace firm. She had grown up watching us argue about drag coefficients and structural integrity. She understood how my mind worked. She knew that I did not operate on feelings, I operated on facts, and right now the facts of my life were not adding up. I parked the truck in the underground lot and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The receptionist tried to stop me, saying Ms. Shaw was in a meeting, but I walked past her with the momentum of a freight train. I opened the heavy oak door to Evelyn's office and walked in. She was sitting behind her desk, reviewing a stack of contracts. She looked up, annoyed at the intrusion, but her expression softened instantly when she saw it was me. Victor, she said, taking off her glasses. She stood up and walked around the desk, giving me a quick hug. She smelled of vanilla and old paper. You look terrible. Tell me what is going on. Brandon called me yesterday, asking about your estate planning documents. He was fishing, Victor trying to find out if the trust was revocable. I sat down in the leather chair opposite her desk and took a deep breath. I did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I laid it out for her clearly and concisely. just as I would present a failure analysis report to the board of directors. He is not just fishing. Evelyn, I said, my voice steady, he is hunting. He brought a doctor to my house today, a man named Eris, to evaluate my competency. They are threatening to file for conservatorship on Monday morning if I do not voluntarily hand over control of my finances and the house. Evelyn's eyes widened. She sat back on the edge of her desk, crossing her arms over her chest. That is aggressive even for Brandon. On what grounds? On the grounds that I am suffering from dementia, I said, letting the word hang in the air between us. He has manufactured evidence, Evelyn. He has someone gaslighting me, turning on stoves, opening doors, changing passwords. He is building a case based on incidents that he is staging. Evelyn stood up and walked to the window looking out at the city. She was silent for a long moment, processing the information. She was one of the sharpest legal minds in the state, and I could see her calculating the angles. We can fight this, she said, turning back to face me. We can get an independent evaluation. We can get testimony from your colleagues at the firm, proving you are still consulting on high-level projects. We can bury him in paperwork for years. No, I said, cutting her off. I do not want to fight him in court for years. Evelyn, I do not want a defensive strategy. I want an offensive one. I want to know why. Why, she asked, looking confused. Why now? I asked, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Brandon has always been greedy, and Tiffany has always been shallow. But this is desperate. This is a level of risk that does not make sense for them, Brandon knows. I am meticulous. He knows I keep records for him. To try to have me declared incompetent while I am still working and driving and living independently is a Hail Mary pass. It is a move you make when you have no other options. I looked Evelyn in the eye and channeled every ounce of authority I had left. I want you to hire a forensic accountant. Evelyn, I said, I want you to hire the best private investigator you know, and I want you to tear Brandon's financial life apart. I want to know every debt, every loan, every credit card transaction, and every gamble he has made in the last 5 years. Evelyn walked back to her chair and sat down slowly. She picked up a silver pen and twirled it between her fingers. Victor, you have to understand what you are asking. If we do this, if we dig into his finances, we are going to invade his privacy in a way that is legally gray unless we have cause. I have cause, I said, slamming my hand down on the arm of the chair. The cause is that he is trying to steal my life. I am funding this investigation, and I want the results by tomorrow night. I want to know exactly how much money he needs and who he owes it to, because a man does not try to put his father in a nursing home just for extra spending money. He does it because he is drowning and he needs a life raft. Evelyn sighed and opened her laptop. She began typing, her face illuminated by the screen. I know a guy, she said quietly, former IRS investigator. He is expensive and he is mean, but he can find money in a desert. If anyone can find out why Brandon is panicking. It is him. She stopped typing and looked at me over the top of the screen. Her eyes were sad, filled with a pity. I did not want, but understood. Victor, she said, her voice soft, I need to warn you, though. You are looking for the truth, and as your lawyer I will help you find it. But as your friend I have to ask you, are you ready for what we might find? I am an engineer, Evelyn, I said, standing up and buttoning my raincoat. I deal in structural reality. If there is a crack in the beam, I need to know about it. Ignoring it does not stop the building from falling down. It might break your heart, she said. My heart is already broken, I said, walking toward the door. My son broke it when he looked me in the eye and told me I belonged in a cage now. I am just trying to salvage the foundation. I left her office and walked back to the elevator. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, exhausted clarity. I had set the wheels in motion. I had initiated the counter-move. Now all I could do was wait for the data to come in. I drove home through the darkening city, the rain coming down harder now, washing the streets clean. I thought about Brandon as a little boy running through the sprinkler in the backyard, laughing as the water hit his face. I thought about the pride I felt when he graduated college, the hope I had that he would be a better man than me. Somewhere along the line I had failed him. Maybe I gave him too much. Maybe I shielded him from the consequences of his actions too often. And now he was facing a consequence he could not escape, and instead of facing it like a man, he was trying to sacrifice me to save himself. I pulled into my driveway, the house dark and silent, waiting for me. I parked the truck and sat there for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. I was not afraid of Monday anymore. Let them file their papers. Let them bring their doctors. I had something better than a legal defense. I had the truth, and by the time I was done with them, the truth was going to hit them harder than any lie they could ever invent. I went inside and made myself a cup of tea on the back burner of the stove. I checked the lock on the back door 3 times. Then I sat in the dark living room and waited for the phone to ring. I knew Evelyn would not sleep until she had answers, and neither would I. The engineer was back on the job and the inspection was just beginning. The office of the private investigator was exactly what I expected it to be, located in a nondescript strip mall between a dry cleaner and a payday loan shop. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. I sat on a folding metal chair, my hands resting on my knees, waiting for the man across from me to speak. His name was Miller, a former Treasury agent with eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human sin and decided none of it was surprising anymore. On the desk between us sat a thick manila folder. It was at least 2 inches thick, and the edges were sharp enough to cut skin. Miller did not say a word. At first, he just tapped a cigarette against the pack, not lighting it. Just a nervous habit, I suppose. Finally, he pushed the folder across the scuffed laminate surface toward me with a heaviness that suggested it contained uranium. "You might want to put on your reading glasses for this, Mr. Cross," Miller said, his voice gravelly and devoid of emotion, "and maybe prepare yourself, because in 30 years of doing this, I have seen some ugly things, but this one is a masterclass in financial suicide." I opened the folder, my fingers brushing against the cold paper. The first page was a summary sheet, highlighting a number in bold red ink that made my breath catch in my throat: $482,000.50. I stared at the number, blinking, trying to make it make sense. That was nearly $500,000. That was the cost of a nice home. That was 20 years of savings for a normal family. That was the structural failure I had been looking for. But it was catastrophic beyond my worst calculations. I looked up at Miller, my mouth dry. "What is this?" I asked, pointing to the number. "Is this a business loan? Did he try to start a company and fail?" Miller let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a bark. "Mr. Cross, that is not a business loan. That is gambling debt and speculation losses, mostly cryptocurrency and high-stakes online sports betting. Your son has been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. He buys digital coins when they are high, sells them when they crash, and then tries to make it back by betting on football games. He is chasing his tail, and the tail is on fire." I turned the page, and there it was, page after page of bank statements, highlighting transfers to offshore exchanges, names I did not recognize, located in places like Malta and the Cayman Islands. Thousands of dollars vanishing at a click of a button. 2,000 here, 5,000 there. One night in November, he lost $12,000 in 4 hours. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was not just bad luck. This was an addiction. This was a sickness, but as I turned to the credit card section, the sickness morphed into something else, something more malicious. Tiffany's name was at the top of these statements. 5 different credit cards, all of them maxed out to their limit. Platinum cards, gold cards, cards that charged 25% interest. I ran my finger down the list of purchases, expecting to see groceries or medical bills or maybe repairs for their car. Instead, I saw luxury Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Saks, Fifth Avenue, a spa retreat in Napa Valley, costing $4,000 a weekend. I looked at the dates on these purchases. The spa retreat was 2 weeks ago when Brandon told me he could not afford to fix the leak in his roof, and asked to borrow $500 2 weeks ago when Tiffany told me she was so stressed about money she could not sleep. They were lying to me not just about the big things, but about everything. They were living like royalty on borrowed money, building a house of cards while standing in a wind tunnel. But the real blow, the one that made my blood run cold, came on the last page of the report. It was a photocopy of a document on official bank letterhead with a stamp that said "Final Notice" in angry red letters. It was a foreclosure notice for Brandon's house, I read. The text, my engineer eyes scanning for the critical data point: they were behind on their mortgage by 6 months. The bank had initiated legal proceedings. The auction date was set for exactly 15 days from now. 15 days, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with the force of a car crash. Monday morning, the rush to get the power of attorney, the doctor, the threats, the desperation. They were not worried about my health. They were not worried about me getting lost or forgetting to pay a light bill. They were 15 days away from being homeless. I looked up at Miller, and for the first time I saw a flicker of sympathy in his hard eyes. They need collateral. "Mr. Cross," Miller said quietly, "they are underwater and the sharks are circling. No bank will refinance them with that credit score and that much debt, unless they have a co-signer with substantial assets, or unless they can show they have control over substantial assets." "Me," I whispered, the realization settling over me like a shroud. "They need my house," Miller nodded. "They do not just need your house, they need your portfolio, your pension, and your signature. If you sign that power of attorney on Monday, by Tuesday afternoon, they will have leveraged your property to pay off their arrears. They will drain your retirement accounts to pay the credit cards, and they will use your monthly income to keep the carousel spinning for another 6 months." "And what about me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Miller leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Honestly, sir, based on what I see here, they cannot afford to keep you in that house and pay their debts at the same time. The math does not work. Once they have control, they will sell your place likely to one of those instant cash buyers for quick liquidity, and they will put you in the cheapest state-funded facility they can find. Medicaid will pay for it, so it won't cost them a dime, and they will keep your $12,000 a month for themselves." I closed the folder, the sound echoing in the small room like a gunshot. I sat there for a long time, staring at the beige wall, thinking about the little boy I used to carry on my shoulders, the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee, the boy I taught to fish. I thought about the tuition checks. I wrote the cars. I bought him the times I bailed him out of trouble, always thinking I was helping him build a future. I had not built a future. I had built a monster. Brandon did not love me. He did not even respect me. To him, I was just an asset, a resource to be mined until it was dry and then discarded like a husk. He was willing to erase my life, my dignity, and my freedom just to cover up his own failures and buy his wife another designer handbag. A cold clarity took over my mind. The kind of clarity you get when you realize the engine is on fire and you have to cut the fuel line immediately. There is no room for sentiment in a survival situation. I stood up and picked up the folder, holding it tight. This was my evidence. This was the blueprint of their betrayal. "How much do I owe you, Miller?" I asked, reaching for my wallet. "Evelyn already took care of it," Miller said, standing up to shake my hand. She said, "You are a good man, Mr. Cross. Do not let them bury you." I walked out of that office and into the bright sunlight, but the world looked different now. The colors were sharper, the edges harder. I walked to my truck and threw the folder on the passenger seat. I drove home in silence, my mind working furiously. They thought they had a timeline. They thought they had until Monday to break me, but they did not know that I had seen the clock. They were running against 15 days. If I did nothing, I would lose everything within a month. I would be in a room with 3 other strangers eating cafeteria mush, while Brandon and Tiffany drove my car and spent my money. But if I acted now, if I executed the plan I had been forming, I could reverse the flow. I pulled into my driveway and looked at my house. It was not just wood and brick. It was my life's work. It was the place where I had been happy, where I had been a husband and a father. They wanted to take it from me. They wanted to turn it into cash to feed their greed. Over my dead body, I went inside and called Evelyn. "Do you have the papers ready?" I asked. I do, she said, her voice tight. She had seen the report too. "I am assuming you want to proceed with the trust, not just the trust." "Evelyn," I said, walking into my study and looking at the wall where my degree hung. "I want to accelerate the timeline. I want to transfer the title of the house today, and I want to liquidate the accounts tomorrow morning." "Victor, are you sure?" Evelyn asked. "Once you do this, there is no going back. You will effectively be destitute on paper." "I am sure," I said. Looking at the photo of Brandon on my desk, taken when he was 10 years old, smiling and innocent, I turned the frame face down. "I am not doing this to save money. Evelyn, I am doing this to save myself. My son is dead. He died a long time ago. The man who is coming here on Monday is a thief, and I do not negotiate with thieves." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence. The grief was there, heavy and suffocating, but underneath it was a steel spine of resolve. They wanted a senile old man. Well, they were about to find out that this old man was still the chief engineer, and I was about to decommission their entire operation. I grabbed a pen and a pad of paper. It was time to script the final scene of this tragedy. I would give them exactly what they wanted. I would give them the capitulation, the surrender, the signature. But I would do it on my terms, and when they finally opened the prize they thought they had won, they would find nothing but ash. The investigation was over. The data was conclusive now. It was time for the execution phase, and I promised myself one thing. As I watched the sun go down over the trees, they would never see it coming. The next morning I was back in Evelyn's conference room, but this time the atmosphere was different. The air was not thick with anxiety or shock. Instead, it was charged with the cold, clinical precision of a surgical theater. On the mahogany table sat a stack of documents 3 inches high, each one flagged with a yellow sticky note indicating where I needed to sign my name. Evelyn sat across from me, her hands clasped on top of a file. She looked tired, likely because she had stayed up half the night on drafting these papers. But her eyes were sharp and clear. She was not just my lawyer today. She was the demolition expert I had hired to bring down the structure of my own wealth. "Victor," she said, her voice serious and low, "before you pick up that pen, I need to ask you one last time on the record. Do you fully understand the implications of creating an irrevocable trust?" I looked at the papers. The title on the first page read, "The Victor Cross Charitable Trust." "Understand, Evelyn," I said, reaching for the fountain pen Kate had given me for our 25th anniversary. It felt heavy in my hand, weighted with memory. "Once you transfer your assets into this trust," she continued, "you no longer own them. You are the grantor, but you are not the beneficiary. You cannot demand the money back. You cannot use the funds for personal expenses beyond what is stipulated for your basic care. And most importantly, you cannot change the terms of the trust. Later, if you reconcile with Brandon, you cannot undo this." I uncapped the pen, the gold nib gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "I'm not going to reconcile with a man who views me as livestock to be slaughtered for cash," I said, my voice steady. "I am doing this to ensure that when he walks into court on Monday, he is suing a man who owns nothing but the clothes on his back." I began to sign. The first signature was the hardest. It was the transfer of my primary investment portfolio, 40 years of savings stocks I had bought in the 80s, mutual funds I had nurtured through 3 recessions with a few strokes of black ink. I moved it all out of my name and into the control of a board of trustees that Evelyn would appoint. Next came the savings accounts, the liquid cash that Brandon and Tiffany were undoubtedly salivating over. They probably already had a shopping cart full of items waiting to be purchased the moment they got access to my routing number. I signed that away too, transferring it into an endowment fund for engineering scholarships. Page after page, I dismantled my financial identity. It was a strange sensation, almost like dying, but without the pain, I was shedding the weight of the fortune that had become a target on my back with every signature. I felt lighter. I felt the target shrinking until it disappeared completely. When I reached the final document for the financial transfers, I looked up at Evelyn. "So if Brandon gets guardianship on Monday," I asked. She smiled, a thin, wolfish smile. "If he gets guardianship, he becomes the legal guardian of a man with zero assets. He will have the right to make medical decisions for you, but he will have no access to the money. In the trust is a separate legal entity, and since you are not the trustee, he cannot force the trust to pay his debts. He will be the captain of a ship that has already sunk." "Good," I said, closing the folder. "Now, let us talk about the house." Evelyn hesitated. She opened a separate file, one that contained the deed to my property, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, 2 acres of manicured land in a prime real estate zone. "It was worth over $2 million easily, Victor," she said softly. "This is the big one. I have the papers drawn up to sell it to a holding company for a quick cash buyout. Like you asked, we can get about 70% of market value if we close in 48 hours. I shook my head, looking at the deed. I had thought about this all night. Selling it felt wrong. Selling it meant taking money for the place where I raised my son, and using that money to fight him. It felt dirty. I do not want to sell it." "Evelyn," I said. She looked confused. "Then what do you want to do?" "Brandon's foreclosure is in 15 days. If he gets control of the house on Monday, he will leverage it immediately. We need to get it out of your name." "I want to give it away," I said. Evelyn blinked. "Give it away, Victor. That is a $2 million asset." "I know what it is worth," I said. "But I also know what it is worth to Brandon. It is his lifeline. It is the only thing standing between him and the consequences of his actions. If I sell it, the money just goes into the trust. But if I give it away to the right people, I can do some good." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a brochure I had picked up a few months ago at a coffee shop. It was for a local organization called the Veterans Housing Project. They rehabilitated old buildings to provide transitional housing for homeless veterans, men who had served their country and come back to find nothing but closed doors. "Tell them," I said, sliding the brochure across the table. "Tell them I have a fully furnished 4-bedroom house in excellent condition. Tell them I want to donate the property, the land, and everything inside it to their organization, effective immediately." Evelyn picked up the brochure, her eyebrows raised high. "Victor, this is incredibly generous. But transfers like this take time, inspections, title searches. We do not have time," I said, cutting her off. "Tell them I will sign a quitclaim deed today. Tell them I will handle the title insurance later. Tell them the only condition is that they must take possession of the property this weekend." "This weekend?" Evelyn asked. "Saturday night," I said, a plan forming in my mind, sharp and precise. "I want them to move in. On Saturday night, I want the house to be fully occupied by the time the sun goes down." Evelyn stared at me for a long moment. Then she slowly started to smile. She understood. She realized that I was not just giving the house away, I was turning it into a fortress. "I will call the director," she said, picking up her phone. "His name is Marcus Stone. He is a former Marine. If anyone can mobilize a unit in 24 hours, it is him." I sat there and listened as she made the call. I heard her explain the offer. I heard the silence on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded like a gasp of disbelief. She put the phone on speaker. "Mr. Cross, this is Marcus Stone." The voice on the phone was deep and gravelly, filled with a raw sincerity. "Am I understanding this correctly? You are donating your primary residence to us?" "That is correct, Mr. Stone," I said, leaning toward the phone. "It is a good house, strong foundation, new roof, plenty of room, but I need to know if you can use it immediately." "Sir, we have a waiting list of 50 guys sleeping in shelters right now. We could fill those bedrooms in an hour, good, I said. Then I have a condition. I am going to sign the deed over to you today. But I need your team to be physically present in the house by Saturday evening. I am talking about beds, set up lights on full occupancy. I am moving out on Saturday morning, and I want you moving in on Saturday afternoon. There was a pause, then Stone spoke again. Mr. Cross, we can do that. We have a logistics team that can move mountains, if they have to consider it done. I signed the deed. An hour later, my hand did not shake, not even a little bit. As I signed over the rights to the place where I had lived for 40 years. I felt a profound sense of peace. I was not losing my home. I was giving it a new purpose instead of being a monument to a failed family. It was going to become a sanctuary for men who understood the meaning of duty and honor. After the papers were notarized and the transfer was recorded electronically, Evelyn sat back and exhaled a long breath. "It is done," she said. "You are officially a pauper. Victor, on paper, you do not have a pot to piss in." I laughed, a dry sound that surprised me. I have never felt richer. "Evelyn," I stood up and buttoned my coat. I had one more thing to do. I had to go home and pack. I had to strip the house of the few personal items I wanted to keep and prepare for the final act of this play. Evelyn walked me to the elevator. She looked worried again. "Victor," she said, touching my arm. "What are you going to do when Brandon finds out?" I smiled, the first genuine smile I had felt in days. "He is not going to find out until it is too late." I said, "He is coming to dinner on Saturday night, expecting me to hand over the keys to his inheritance. He thinks he is coming to a surrender." "And what will he find?" Evelyn asked. I looked at the elevator numbers counting down. "He is going to find that the locks have been changed," I said, "and he is going to find that the new owners are not the kind of men you can bully." I left the building and walked out into the cool Seattle air. I had no house, I had no money, I had no legacy to leave to my son, but for the first time in years, I felt free. I had built a wall around my dignity that no court order could breach. I drove home looking at the familiar streets with new eyes. This was the last time I would drive this route as a homeowner. But I was not sad, I was focused. I had to pack my clothes, my books, and the few photographs of Kate that still brought me joy. Everything else, the furniture, the electronics, the expensive rugs Tiffany coveted. I was leaving it all. Let the veterans have the leather sofa. Let them watch the 85-inch television. Let them sleep in the king-sized beds they had earned it. Brandon had not. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Brandon's car parked across the street. He was watching the house again, probably checking to make sure I was not moving furniture out. Little did he know the furniture was staying. It was the ownership that was moving. I waved at him as I pulled into the garage, a cheerful wave that I knew would confuse him. Let him think I was cracking. Let him think I was resigned to my fate. The trap was set and the bait was laid and the iron doors were ready. To slam shut, all I had to do now was wait for Saturday night. The call I made to Brandon on Thursday afternoon was the hardest performance of my life. Not because I was afraid, but because I had to swallow a lifetime of pride to make my voice sound small. I sat in my armchair, gripping the receiver, and forced a tremor into my tone. I told him. I was tired. I told him I was confused, and I told him I was ready to sign the papers. He arrived with Tiffany at 6:00 sharp. They were not late this time. Greed has a way of making people punctual. I had prepared a pot roast, the smell of slow-cooked beef and carrots filling the kitchen. It was the same meal Kate used to make on Sundays, a meal that represented family and comfort. But tonight, it was just a prop on a stage set. When I opened the door, I did not stand tall. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my chest to make myself look smaller. Frail, I deliberately left my shirt untucked on one side, a detail I knew Tiffany would notice immediately. "Hey, Dad," Brandon said, stepping inside, his eyes scanning the room, not looking for me but looking for boxes, looking for signs of surrender. I stepped back to let them in, shuffling my feet slightly against the hardwood floor. "Come in," I said, keeping my voice low and raspy. "I made dinner. I thought we should talk one last time before we handle the paperwork." Tiffany walked past me without a word, her heels clicking on the floor like a countdown clock. She was already mentally measuring the entryway for a new console table. I could see it in the way she pursed her lips and narrowed her eyes. She was not visiting a relative. She was inspecting an acquisition. We sat down at the dining table, the same table where the war had started just days ago. It was thick with tension, but this time the dynamic was reversed. Before I had been the obstacle. Now I was the defeated conquest. I served the food, my hands shaking as I ladled the gravy onto their plates. I saw Brandon exchange a look with Tiffany, a smirk that said, "Sure, I told you he would break it." Took every ounce of discipline I had learned in 40 years of engineering to keep from pouring the hot gravy into his lap. I have been thinking a lot about what you said, Brandon. I began staring down at my plate, picking at a potato. I have been thinking about the stove and the passwords and the open door. Maybe you are right. Maybe I am losing my grip. Brandon leaned forward, his voice dripping with that fake syrup of concern. Again, of course I am right, Dad. We are not trying to hurt you. We are trying to save you from yourself. It is a lot of responsibility running a house like this, managing a portfolio of your size. It is too much for one person, especially at your age. I nodded slowly, looking defeated. I know, I said softly. I just did not want to admit it. I did not want to be a burden. You are not a burden, Victor. Tiffany chimed in, taking a sip of wine. Though her eyes were cold, provided you let us handle things. If you let us take the wheel, we can make sure you are comfortable. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded document. The direct deposit authorization form that Brandon had slammed onto this table on Tuesday. I smoothed it out on the tablecloth, the paper crinkling in the silence. I brought a pen, Brandon said quickly, reaching into his jacket pocket, almost knocking over his water glass in his haste. Here, use this one. I took the pen. It was a heavy, expensive ballpoint. Probably bought with one of the credit cards I had just paid off. In my mind, I looked at the form. One last time, the lines were clear. Authorizing the transfer of all employment income and pension disbursements to a joint account held by Brandon and Tiffany Cross. I hesitated. Letting the pen hover over the signature line, I wanted them to sweat. I wanted them to feel the anticipation. Are you sure this will cover everything? I asked, looking up at Brandon. My consulting fees, the pension, the Social Security. Everything, Dad. Brandon said, his eyes locked on the pen. We will pay the bills, we will give you cash for groceries, and we will make sure the house is maintained. You won't have to worry about a single dollar ever again. I lowered the pen and signed my name, Victor J. Cross. I signed it with a shaky hand, adding an extra loop to the S just to sell the image of a man in decline. But inside I was laughing, a cold, bitter laugh, because I knew something they did not. They thought they were capturing a river of money, but they were tapping into a dry well. I had resigned from my consulting job, effective yesterday. My final paycheck for $145 had already been processed. My pension had been redirected to the trust account earlier that morning. Legally, I had no income for this form to capture. They were stealing a ghost. I pushed the paper across the table to Brandon. He snatched it up, checking the signature like a bank teller, verifying a check. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket, patting it with a satisfaction that made me sick. There, I said, leaning back in my chair. It is done. Good, Brandon said, exhaling a long breath. You made the right choice, Dad, really. But there is one more thing, I said, raising a finger. They both froze, looking at me sharply. What is it? Tiffany asked. I looked around the room, letting my gaze linger on the walls. I cannot live here alone anymore, I said, my voice trembling, just the right amount. The house is too big, and if I am losing my memory, I am afraid I might burn it down or hurt myself. I think it is time for a change, Brandon. S. eyes lit up. What are you suggesting, Dad? I think you should move in, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I could hear the rain tapping against the window. You want us to move in, Tiffany? Asked her voice, rising an octave in excitement. Yes, I said, looking down at my hands. I have thought about it. I will take the small bedroom on the first floor, the one off the kitchen. It is plenty of room for me. You two can have the master suite upstairs, and the rest of the house you can keep an eye on me, and you can manage the property better if you are on site. Brandon looked at Tiffany, and I saw a look of pure, unadulterated joy pass between them. It was the look of two pirates who had just boarded a galleon without firing a shot. Not only did they have my money, now they had the mansion, Dad, that is. That is a great idea, Brandon said, trying to sound calm but failing. We can definitely make that work. It makes the most sense, really, for safety. I nodded, yes, for safety, and I want to do it soon. I want to get it over with. How soon? Tiffany asked, leaning forward. This weekend, I said. Saturday. Saturday, Brandon asked. That is in 2 days, I know, I said. But I have a plan. I am going to go up to the cabin at the lake for the weekend. I am going to go fishing one last time just to clear my head and say goodbye to my old life. I will leave Saturday morning and come back Monday evening. That will give you 2 full days to move your things in and get settled without me being in the way. You can take the master bedroom. Move my things into the guest room. Do whatever you need to do to make it yours. I watched them process this. The offer was too good to be true, and that is exactly why they bought it. It appealed to their laziness and their greed. They did not want to move in with me watching over their shoulders. They wanted free rein. They wanted to walk into the master suite and start claiming territory without the old man breathing down their necks. That sounds perfect, Dad, Brandon said, smiling a genuine smile for the first time in years. You go fishing, relax. We will handle the heavy lifting. By the time you come back on Monday, we will be all settled in and we can start this new chapter. New chapter? Tiffany repeated, looking around the room with a predatory gaze. I am going to paint the hallway. Gray, she murmured almost to herself. And that chandelier has to go. I felt a spike of anger, but I pushed it down. Let them plan, let them dream, let them imagine themselves, living in my house, sleeping in my bed, enjoying the fruits of my labor. Great, I said, standing up slowly, holding onto the table for support. Then it is settled. I will leave the key under the mat for you on Saturday morning. I walked them to the door, playing the part until the very end. Brandon patted me on the back, a condescending gesture of victory. Get some rest, Dad, he said. You look exhausted. I am, I said, looking him in the eye for a brief second, letting him see the fatigue but hiding the fire behind it. I am ready for this to be over. I watched them walk to their car. They were walking lighter, bouncing almost. They were already spending the money in their heads. They were already hosting parties in my living room. As they drove away, I locked the door and slid the deadbolt home. The sound was loud in the empty house. I stood there in the hallway and slowly straightened my back. I tucked my shirt in. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. The frail old man was gone, replaced by the engineer. The performance was over. The trap was set. I had given them the bait and they had swallowed it whole. They thought they were moving into a palace on Saturday. But they were walking into a fortress occupied by men who had seen real war. Men who would not be impressed by Brandon's suit or Tiffany's attitude. I walked back to the dining table and picked up the plate of roast beef. I had not eaten. I scraped it into the trash can without hesitation. I had 2 days left, 2 days to pack my life into boxes, 2 days to strip the house of everything that mattered to me, and 2 days to prepare for the moment when the hammer would fall. I went to my study and opened the safe. I took out the deed I had signed over to the Veterans Housing Project earlier that day. I looked at it one last time. Then I placed it on the desk, right next to the letter. I would leave for them. They wanted the house well. They were going to get it, but they forgot to ask who else would be living there. I turned off the lights and went upstairs to sleep for the first time in a week. I slept soundly like a baby or like a general on the eve of a battle he knows he is going to win. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in covert logistics, executed with the same precision I once used to coordinate supply chains for aircraft assembly lines. I treated my own home not as a sanctuary, but as a compromised zone, and every movement I made had to be calculated to avoid detection. I told Brandon and Tiffany I was preparing for a fishing trip, which gave me the perfect cover to load boxes into the back of my truck. Without raising suspicion, they assumed I was packing tackle waders and coolers full of beer. In reality, I was packing the fragments of my life that I refused to leave behind, for them to pawn or destroy. On Thursday morning, I started with the garage, my workshop, the place where I had taught Brandon how to hold a hammer, and where I had built the cradle he slept in. As a baby, I looked at my tools, the lathe, the drill press, the vintage set of snap-on wrenches that were worth more than Tiffany's car. I could not take them all, and I certainly could not leave them for Brandon to sell for pennies on the dollar. So I made a choice. I loaded the most valuable precision instruments into the truck and drove them to a pawn shop 3 towns over in Tacoma, a place where nobody knew my name or my face. I sold them for cash, a fraction of what they were worth, but the money did not matter. It was about denying the enemy resources, watching the pawnbroker count out the bills. I felt a strange sense of detachment. These were just objects, cold steel and rubber. They were not my skill. They were not my memories. They were just things, and I was learning very quickly that things were heavy anchors when you were trying to sail away from a sinking life. Friday was harder. Friday was for Kate, while Brandon and Tiffany were likely at a brunch, toasting to their future wealth. I was in the attic, kneeling in the dust, surrounded by the true treasures of this house. I found the box containing Kate's wedding dress, preserved in acid-free tissue paper. I found the albums of photographs from our travels before Brandon was born, pictures of us in Paris, in Rome, young and in love, with no idea of the heartbreak that awaited us in our old age. I could not sell these, and I could not leave them. I drove to a climate-controlled storage facility on the outskirts of the city, a concrete block of a building with no windows, and I rented a small unit. I placed the boxes inside, stacking them gently against the wall. It felt like I was burying her all over again, leaving her things in this cold, dark room. But I knew she would understand. She would never want her wedding dress to be touched by the woman who was currently plotting to strip her home bare. I locked the rolling door and pocketed the key, the only physical weight I would carry into my new life. By Friday evening, the house felt different. It looked the same on the surface. The furniture was still there. The paintings were on the walls. The rugs were on the floors. But the soul of the place was gone, packed away in a storage unit, or sold to a stranger in Tacoma. The house was now just a shell, a stage set waiting for the actors to arrive. And for the final curtain to fall, I spent that last night wandering through the rooms, like a ghost haunting his own life. I walked into the kitchen and ran my hand along the granite countertop. I had installed myself 20 years ago. I remembered the Thanksgiving dinners we had cooked here, the laughter, the noise, the feeling of safety. I walked into the living room and stood by the fireplace, remembering the Christmas mornings when Brandon would tear open his presents, his eyes wide with wonder. It was a physical pain in my chest, a sharp ache that made it hard to breathe, because I still loved that little boy. I loved the memory of him, even as I prepared to go to war with the man he had become. I went upstairs to the hallway and stopped at the doorframe of Brandon's old bedroom. There, painted on the white wood, were the pencil marks we had made over the years, tracking his height, dates, and names, scribbled in my handwriting, and Kate's measuring his growth inch by inch. I reached out and touched the highest mark made when he was 18, just before he left for college. He had been so tall, so full of promise, standing there grinning down at me, ready to take on the world. I had been so proud of him then. I had believed that I was raising a good man, a man of character. Somewhere along the line, the structural integrity had failed. Maybe I had spoiled him, maybe I had protected him too much from the harsh realities of the world. Or maybe some people are just born with a crack in the foundation that only reveals itself under pressure. I took a deep breath and forced my hand away from the doorframe. I could not erase the marks, and I could not erase the past, but I could refuse to let it hold me hostage. I did not sleep in the master bedroom that night. I could not bear to lie in the bed I had shared with Kate, knowing that in 24 hours, Tiffany would be claiming it as her own instead. Slept in the guest room on a small single bed staring up at the ceiling. Listening to the house settle. Listening to the wind against the windows, trying to memorize the sounds of the place that had been my universe for half a century. Saturday morning arrived with a gray steel light that matched my mood. I woke up at 5 military time, my internal clock refusing to let me linger. I showered and dressed in my fishing clothes, flannel shirt, durable cargo pants, and heavy boots. I packed the last bag, a small duffel with my toiletries and a change of clothes. Then I went to the kitchen for the final task. I sat down at the table, the same table where the ultimatum had been delivered, and I pulled out a piece of notebook papers. I needed to leave a note. Brandon would expect a note. He would expect a letter full of emotion, perhaps an apology, or a plea for them to take care of the house, or maybe a tearful goodbye. I uncapped my pen and wrote. But I did not write about feelings. I wrote about the boiler too. The new occupants. I wrote my handwriting, neat and blocky. The heating system is a hydronic radiant floor system installed in 1998. It operates on a closed-loop pressure, should be maintained between 12 and 15 psi. If the pressure drops below 10, check the expansion tank valve located behind the water heater. The zone valves for the upstairs bedrooms are prone to sticking. If the thermostat is set below 65 degrees, do not force the valve manually. Use a silicone lubricant spray regarding the electrical panel. The breaker for the outdoor lights is number 14. It is sensitive to moisture, so if it trips during heavy rain, wait for it to dry out before resetting. I wrote down the instructions for the security alarm, the code for the garage door keypad, and the schedule for the septic tank. Maintenance. I covered every mechanical quirk of the house, every operational detail that kept the machine running smoothly. I signed it simply V. Cross. I read it over and nodded. It was the perfect goodbye. It was the letter of an engineer handing over a machine. It was devoid of sentiment, devoid of anger, and devoid of love. It was a user manual for a life I was no longer living. I left it in the center of the kitchen table, anchored by the heavy salt shaker, so it would not blow away. I picked up my duffel bag and walked to the front door. I did not look back at the kitchen. I did not look back at the living room. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut, feeling the heavy thud of the latch engaging for the last time. I bent down and lifted the welcome mat, the one that said "Home Sweet Home," and placed the brass key underneath it. Just as I had promised. It was a lie, of course. The key would work, but it would not open the door to the future. They imagined it would open the door to a reality check they never saw coming. I walked to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots, the rain starting to fall again. A soft mist that blurred the edges of the world, climbed into the cab and started the engine. The vibration of the steering wheel felt grounding, felt real. I backed out of the driveway, slowly passing the mailbox I had painted last summer, passing the oak tree I had planted when we moved in. I drove down the street, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror, until it was just a small shape in the distance. And then I turned the corner, and it was gone. I did not cry. I thought I would. But the tears did not come instead. I felt a strange lightness, a release of pressure like a valve opening to vent steam. I was homeless. I was technically poor, and I was alone, but as I merged onto the highway, heading not toward the lake but toward the airport, I realized I was also something else. I was free. I was free from the lies, free from the manipulation, and free from the burden of trying to save a son who did not want to be saved. I had done my duty. I had protected the asset, not the house, but the dignity of the man who built it. I turned on the radio, letting the music fill the cab, driving steadily through the rain, leaving the wreckage behind, ready to let the demolition crew move in and find out that the building was already empty. I was not sitting in the passenger seat of the rental truck that pulled into my driveway that Saturday evening, but I can picture the scene with perfect clarity because I know my son and I know his wife better than they know themselves. They would have been high on adrenaline and arrogance, the kind of intoxication that comes from getting something for nothing. Brandon was likely driving with one hand on the wheel, imagining himself as the lord of the manor, while Tiffany swiped through interior design apps on her phone, planning the destruction of the home I had built. They had rented a 20-foot truck, not because they had that much furniture, but because they wanted to make a statement. They were moving in and they were taking over completely. I imagined Tiffany complaining about the smell of the rental cab, wrinkling her nose and saying that it didn't matter, because soon she would be sleeping in the master suite with the silk drapes and the walk-in closet. She had probably already decided which walls to knock down. She had mentioned turning my library, the room where I kept my first editions and my drafting schematics, into a live streaming studio for her fashion channel. She wanted to paint the mahogany shelves white and install ring lights. She wanted to erase the smell of old paper and tobacco and replace it with the scent of vanity. They pulled into the driveway just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house looked welcoming. From the outside, the porch light was on just as I had left it, and the windows glowed with a warm, inviting light. Brandon must have felt a surge of triumph as he turned off the engine, looking up at the brick facade, thinking that he had finally won. He had beaten the old man, he had outsmarted the engineer, and now he was the king of the castle. "Come on, let's get the boxes inside before it starts raining again," Brandon said. Jumping out of the truck, he walked up the path with a strut that belonged to a man who had earned his success, not one who had stolen it. Tiffany followed him, her heels clicking on the pavement, carrying nothing but her purse and her sense of entitlement. They reached the front door, and Brandon bent down to lift the welcome mat. I can imagine his smirk as he found the brass key right where I said it would be. "See," he told Tiffany. "He is so predictable, he does exactly what he is told." He slid the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked smoothly, a sound he interpreted as permission, but which was actually the sound of a trap springing shut. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, shouting out a mock greeting, just in case I had decided to stay. "Hello, Dad. Are you here or are you off drowning worms at the lake?" He expected silence. He expected the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock. He expected to walk into a museum of my life that he could start dismantling piece by piece. Instead, he walked into a construction zone. The first thing that must have hit him was the smell. It was not the smell of lemon polish and pot roast. It was the smell of sweat, unwashed denim, stale tobacco, and gun oil. It was the smell of men who had been working hard and living rough. Brandon stopped dead in the entryway, his boots squeaking on the hardwood floor. Tiffany bumped into him from behind, letting out a small annoyance watch. "Where you are going, Brandon," she said, pushing past him, to get into the foyer. Then she stopped too, and the annoyance in her voice turned into a gasp that sounded like all the air leaving a balloon. The hallway was empty, not just tidy but stripped. The antique console table where we kept the mail was gone. The mirror with the gold leaf frame was gone. The rug that ran the length of the hall was gone. The walls were bare, the paint looking brighter and more exposed without the photos and paintings to break it up. But it was the living room that made their hearts stop. They walked forward, drawn by a strange mechanical noise, the sound of a power drill whirring and the clank of metal on metal. They stepped through the archway, and the vision of their luxury future shattered into a million pieces. My living room. The room with the vaulted ceiling and the stone fireplace was unrecognizable. The Italian leather sofa was gone. The 85-inch television was gone. The coffee table made of reclaimed wood was gone. In their place was a scene that looked like a barracks. 10 men were in the room, 10 men who looked like they had been carved out of granite and left out in the storm. Too long, they were wearing leather vests with patches on the back, patches that said things like Vietnam Vet Desert Storm, and Semper Fi. Their arms were covered in tattoos, serpents, daggers, and names of fallen brothers. They had thick beards and scars that told stories of violence and survival. They were in the middle of assembling metal bunk beds, heavy industrial frames that were being bolted together. Right where my sofa used to sit, mattresses were stacked. Against the wall, wrapped in plastic duffel bags and rucksacks, were piled in the corner, looking like a supply drop in a war zone. The music was playing from a portable radio, not jazz or classical, but heavy rock, pounding out a rhythm that shook the floorboards. Brandon stood there, his mouth hanging open, his brain unable to process the data. His eyes darted around the room, looking for something familiar. Looking for me, looking for an explanation that would make sense of this invasion. "Excuse me," Brandon said, his voice cracking slightly, barely audible over the music. Nobody heard him. One of the men, a giant with a gray beard and a bandana tied around his head, was tightening a bolt on the bed frame. Another man was unpacking a crate of canned food on the kitchen island. "Excuse me," Brandon yelled louder, stepping further into the room. "Who are you people? What are you doing in my house?" The music cut off abruptly. A man standing near the radio had hit the switch. The sudden silence was heavy and threatening. All 10 men stopped what they were doing. They turned slowly to look at Brandon and Tiffany. It was the kind of look a pack of wolves gives a stray dog that has wandered into their territory. It was not fear. It was not even anger. It was a cold calculation of threat assessment. From the center of the room, a man stepped forward. He was the one in charge. That much was obvious. He was not the biggest man there, but he carried himself with a terrifying stillness. He had a black patch over his left eye and a scar that ran from his temple to his jawline. His name was Gunnar, though Brandon did not know that yet. Gunnar wiped his hands on a rag and tucked it into the back pocket of his jeans. He walked toward Brandon, stopping just inside the personal space boundary, looking him up and down with his one good eye, an eye that was blue and hard as ice. "Can I help you, son, Gunnar?" asked his voice, sounding like gravel crunching under tires. Brandon puffed out his chest, trying to summon the authority he thought he possessed. "I think you better explain what you are doing here. This is my father's house, and I am his power of attorney. I want to know where my father is and why you are moving furniture into my living room." Gunnar tilted his head slightly, as if he was trying to understand a foreign language. "Your father," he repeated slowly, looking around the room. "I don't see any father here. This is a private residence owned by the Veterans Housing Project. What are you talking about?" Tiffany shrieked, stepping out from behind Brandon, her voice shrill and panicked, looking at the dirty boots of the men on her future floor. "This is Victor Cross's house. We are moving in today. Who gave you the keys?" Gunnar reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was not the deed, it was the letter I had left. The one with the instructions on the boiler. He tapped it against his palm. "Victor Cross." Gunnar said thoughtfully, "That's the name of the donor. Nice guy engineer left us very detailed instructions on how to keep the pipes from freezing. He donated this property to our unit. Effective yesterday, signed, sealed and delivered." "Donated," Brandon stammered, his face going pale, the blood draining out of him as the word hit him like a physical blow. "Donated? What do you mean donated?" "I mean he gave it to us," Gunnar said, stepping closer, forcing Brandon to take a step back. "He gave us the land, the house, and everything he didn't take with him. Said he wanted it to go to men who would appreciate a roof over their heads. Said he was done with it." "That's a lie," Brandon shouted, his voice rising in hysteria. "My father is senile. He doesn't know what he is doing. I have a document right here." He patted his pocket frantically, trying to find the direct deposit form, as if it was a shield. "I have a document that says I control his finances. He can't give away a house without my permission." Gunnar laughed, a dry, short bark of a laugh that was echoed by the other men in the room. "Son," Gunnar said, leaning in close so Brandon could smell the coffee and tobacco on his breath, "unless your name is on the deed, And unless you have a court order signed by a judge overriding a charitable donation made by a man of sound mind, you don't have squat. What you have is a trespassing charge waiting to happen." Tiffany looked around the room, her eyes wide with horror. She saw the bunk beds. She saw the men she saw. Her dream of a luxury renovation crumbling into dust. "Where is the furniture?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where are the antiques? Where is the silver?" Gunnar shrugged. "Sold, moved, or donated," he said, looking at her with open contempt. "We kept the pots and pans and the fridge, the rest of the fancy stuff." "The old man got rid of it," said he didn't want any clutter left behind. "For the rats," Tiffany gasped, clutching her purse to her chest. "Are you calling us rats? I didn't call you anything," Lady Gunnar said, his voice dropping an octave. "But if the shoe fits, you can wear it now. I am going to ask you nicely. One time, this is a shelter for homeless veterans. Some of these boys have PTSD, and they don't react well to loud noises or intruders. So unless you have induction papers and a valid military ID, I suggest you turn around, walk out that door, and get that truck off our driveway before we decide to help you move it ourselves." Brandon looked at Gunnar, then he looked at the other men who had started to pick up tools again. Hammers, wrenches, heavy steel pipes. They weren't threatening him overtly, but the threat was there, hanging in the air like smoke. "This isn't over," Brandon said, his voice shaking, trying to save face even as he retreated. "I am calling the police. I am calling my lawyer. My father has been kidnapped or coerced. This is fraud." "You make your calls," Gunnar said, crossing his arms over his chest. "But do it from the street, because right now you are on private property, and we have a very strict policy about uninvited guests." One of the men in the back revved a power drill and pulled wow, sharp aggressive sound that made Tiffany jump. "Let's go, Brandon," she hissed, grabbing his arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket. "Let's just go. We can call the police from the car." Brandon looked at the room one last time, looked at the kingdom he thought he had conquered, only to find it occupied by a different army. He looked at Gunnar's one good eye and saw something there that terrified him. He saw a man who had nothing to lose facing a boy who had just lost everything. He turned around and walked out the door, his legs stiff, his movement jerky. Tiffany ran ahead of him, stumbling in her heels, almost falling down the porch steps. Gunnar followed them to the doorway, standing on the threshold, watching them retreat. "And hey," Gunnar called out as Brandon reached the truck door. Brandon turned back, his face a mask of misery and rage. "Don't forget to take your trash with you," Gunnar said, pointing to the direct deposit form that had fallen out of Brandon's pocket onto the driveway. Brandon stared at the paper fluttering in the wind. Then he got into the truck and slammed the door. The engine roared to life and they reversed out of the driveway so fast they almost took out the mailbox. I wasn't there to see it, but I know Gunnar, he is a man of his word, and as the truck sped away down the street, leaving the house behind, I imagine Gunnar smiled, just a little bit, before turning back to his men. "All right, boys," he would have said. "Let's get these beds set up. We have a roof over our heads tonight, thanks to a man who knew how to clear the runway." I was sitting in seat 2A of a British Airways flight destined for London, enjoying the gentle hum of the cabin and the taste of a very expensive vintage champagne when my phone began to vibrate. On the side table, I had been expecting the call for the last hour ever since the sun went down in Seattle. I knew the timing perfectly. I knew exactly how long it would take for Gunnar to evict them. And I knew exactly how long it would take for Brandon to drive away in a panic and reach for his phone to scream at me. I picked up the device and saw his name flashing on the screen, Randon Cross, calling, seeing his name used to bring me a sense of warmth, a feeling of connection to the future I had helped create. But now it just looked like a notification from a debt collector. I took a sip of champagne, enjoying the bubbles before sliding my thumb across the screen to answer. "Hello, Brandon," I said, my voice calm and steady, contrasting sharply with the chaotic noise coming from the other end of the line. "Dad, where are you?" Brandon screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria, gaining altitude in a way that made him sound like a frightened child. We just went to the house and there are people there. Crazy people, bikers and homeless guys. They have taken over the place. They said you gave it to them. Tell me where you are so I can come get you, and we can go to the police together. I set my glass down on the white linen napkin. I am not missing. Brandon and I have not been kidnapped. I am perfectly safe and exactly where I want to be. What are you talking about? He yelled. I could hear Tiffany sobbing in the background, a high-pitched wailing sound that grated on my nerves. Those men said, "You signed the deed over to them. They threw us out." "Dad, they threw us out of our own house." "It is not your house, Brandon," I corrected him gently. "It was my house, and I can do whatever I want with it. And what I wanted to do was give it to men who actually understand the concept of honor and sacrifice, men who would never try to declare their own father incompetent, just to pay off their gambling debts." There was a silence on the line, a sudden vacuum where the screaming had been. I could hear him breathing heavy, ragged breaths as the reality of what I said sank in. "You know," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You know about the debts. I know everything, son," I said, looking out the window at the clouds stretching out beneath the wing like a white ocean. "I know about the $400,000 you lost in crypto. I know about the sports betting, and I know about Tiffany's credit cards, most importantly. I know that your house is being foreclosed on in less than 2 weeks. I know you didn't want to take care of me, you wanted to liquidate me." He didn't deny it. He didn't try to defend himself. Instead, his voice shifted from fear to a cold, desperate anger, the tone of a cornered animal. "Fine," he spat out. "So you know. So you gave the house away to spite us, that you are a sick old man, but you forgot one thing, Dad. You signed the papers. You signed the direct deposit authorization and the power of attorney. We still control your finances. We might not have the house, but we have your income. And with $12,000 a month, we can still save our place and fight you on the deed later." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling a flicker of pity, not for him, but for the sheer depth of his delusion. He still thought he was playing a game of checkers while I had already cleared the chessboard. "Is that right?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational. "Well, if you are so sure about that, why don't you check the account?" "Brandon, I believe the transfer went through this afternoon right on schedule." I heard the rustling of fabric as he fumbled for his phone, likely putting me on speaker so he could open his banking app. I imagined him and Tiffany huddled together in the cab of that rental truck, their faces illuminated by the blue light of the screen, hoping for a miracle, hoping to see a 5-figure number that would solve all their problems. I took another sip of champagne and waited. A moment later, I heard a sound that was half gasp and half scream. It was the sound of a heart breaking, or perhaps a bank account breaking. "What is this?" Brandon shrieked, his voice so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "What is this ad? $145. $145.50 to be exact," I said, checking the notification on my own watch. "That sounds about right." "Where's the rest of it?" he demanded. "Where is the consulting money? Where is the pension? Where is the Social Security?" "You said you signed it over." "I did sign it over," I said quietly. "I signed over exactly what you asked for my employment income. But you see, Brandon, I resigned from the firm on Wednesday. Effectively immediately, that $145 is the prorated pay for my last 2 days of work. That is my entire employment income for the month and for the foreseeable future." "You quit," he whispered, the word coming out like the curse. I retired. I corrected him again. "I am 72 years old. It was time. And as for the pension and the investment dividends, well, those are no longer personal income. I moved all my assets into an irrevocable trust on Friday morning. Technically, I don't own that money anymore. The trust does, and since you are the guardian of Victor Cross, the individual and not the trustee, of the Victor Cross Charitable Trust, you have absolutely no access to those funds." I let the silence stretch out, letting the legal weight of my words crush him. "You have power of attorney over a man who has 0 assets and 0 income. I continued, my voice hard and final. You are the captain of a ghost ship, Brandon. You have control over nothing, but we need that money. Tiffany's voice cut through the background, shrill and terrified. We have the mortgage payment due on Tuesday. If we don't pay, they will take the house. I know, I said, and I suggest you start looking for a smaller apartment, maybe. Something in a neighborhood you can actually afford, because the Bank of Dad is closed permanently. Dad, please. Brandon's voice broke. He was crying now. Genuine tears of terror. Dad, please don't do this. We are going to lose everything. We will be on the street. You won't be on the street, I said, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I am sure Tiffany's parents have a basement you can live in, or you can get a job. Brandon, a real job, not playing with digital coins. Maybe you can learn a trade. Start at the bottom like I did. Learn what it feels like to earn $1 instead of stealing it, Dad. I am sorry, he sobbed. I am so sorry. We didn't mean it. You meant every word I said, cutting him off. You meant it. When you called the doctor, you meant it. When you threatened to put me in a state home. And you meant it when you looked at me with disgust at the dinner table. Apologies, born from poverty, don't count, Brandon. You are only sorry because you got caught and because you lost. The flight attendant approached my seat holding a warm towel. Mr. Cross, can I get you anything else before we dim the cabin lights? No, thank you, I said to her, smiling. I have everything I need. I turned back to the phone one last time. I am going to hang up now, Brandon. I am going to Europe for a while, maybe visit the places your mother and I loved. I don't want you to call me again. The lawyers have instructed me to cease communication with you, pending the finalization of the trust. If you need anything, contact Evelyn Shaw, but I warn you, she is not authorized to give you money either. Dad, wait, don't hang up. Good luck with the foreclosure, son, I said, and I pressed the red button, ending the call and ending the chapter of my life that had caused me so much pain. I put the phone face down on the table and looked out the window again. The plane was banking, turning east toward the Atlantic. The lights of the city were fading behind us, disappearing into the darkness, just like the house, just like the debts, just like the betrayal. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was the phone again, Brandon calling back, desperate and broken. I reached into my pocket and turned the device off completely, holding the power button until the screen went black. I sat back in the wide leather seat and closed my eyes, allowing myself to feel the grief I had been holding back. It hurt losing a son, hurt more than losing a limb. But the wound was clean. Now the infection had been cut out, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of his expectations crushing my chest. I was alone in the sky, flying toward a new horizon, with $145 sent to my enemy and millions secured for my legacy. I had won the war, but there was no parade, just the quiet satisfaction of a man who had stood his ground and refused to be erased. I signaled the flight attendant. Actually, I said as she walked by, I will have another glass of champagne. She smiled and poured the golden liquid. To new beginnings, she said. Raised my glass. To turbulence, I said softly. Because sometimes you have to shake everything up to find out what is actually solid. I took a sip and let the plane carry me away, leaving my son to learn the lesson I should have taught him years ago, that the only things you truly own are the things you earn, and everything else can be taken away in the blink of an eye. I did not stay to watch the fallout that happened in Seattle after I hung up that phone. But Evelyn kept me informed, not because I asked for the details, but because she knew I needed the closure of knowing the equation had finally balanced. The bank did not wait for Brandon to find a job, or for Tiffany to find a conscience. The foreclosure process, which had already been in motion, accelerated with the ruthless efficiency of a machine that has been ignored for too long. The following Tuesday, the day the mortgage payment was due, and missed was the final nail in the coffin of their illusion. Evelyn told me that the eviction notice was served 3 days later. They did not leave with dignity. They did not pack their boxes quietly and move on. Instead, they fought it, screaming at the deputies who came to escort them off the property. Tiffany apparently tried to claim squatter's rights in a house she had never paid a dime for, while Brandon sat on the curb, crying into his hands. The neighbors, the same. People they had tried to impress with their leased cars and designer clothes watched from their windows as the facade crumbled completely. They had nowhere to go, no friends willing to take them in because fair weather. Friends disappear when the storm hits, and no money to pay for a hotel. Their credit was destroyed, their assets were non-existent, and their reputation was in tatters. So they did the only thing they could do. They moved into the basement of Tiffany's mother's house, a cramped, damp space in a neighborhood that Tiffany had spent her whole life trying to escape. I can only imagine the atmosphere in that basement, the air thick with resentment, and the smell of mildew mingling with the scent of expensive perfume that Tiffany refused to stop wearing. It did not take long for the pressure to crack them wide open, without my money, to act as a buffer against reality. They turned on each other like starving wolves. Tiffany blamed Brandon for being weak, for not securing the bag, for letting his father outsmart him. Brandon blamed Tiffany for the debt, for the spending, for pushing him to threaten me in the first place. The arguments were loud and constant. Evelyn said the police were called twice for domestic disturbances, not violence, just screaming matches, so intense they shook the walls, finally less than a month after they lost their house. Tiffany packed her bags and left. She didn't go far, just upstairs to her old bedroom, leaving Brandon alone in the basement, with his debts and his regrets. They are currently separated, pending a divorce that neither of them can afford to pay for. And Brandon, well, my son finally got a job. He works for a delivery service, now driving a beat-up sedan around the city, dropping off food and packages to people who live in houses like the one he used to own. Evelyn sent me a photo once taken by a mutual friend who happened to order a pizza. It showed Brandon standing on a porch in the rain, holding a cardboard box, his suit replaced by a wet uniform, arrogance replaced by a look of profound exhaustion. I looked at that photo for a long time, trying to find the pity in my heart. But I could not find it. What I found instead was a grim satisfaction, not because he was suffering, but because for the first time in his life he was actually earning his keep. He was learning the lesson I had tried to teach him, with words for decades, only now he was learning it with sweat and sore feet. Maybe this is the making of him. Maybe hitting rock bottom will give him the foundation he never bothered to build when he was standing on my shoulders. As for me, I am sitting at a small round table on a cobblestone street in the Marais district of Paris. The coffee here is strong and rich, served in a ceramic cup that warms my hands. The air smells of rain and fresh bread, and nobody here knows my name. Nobody here knows that I used to be a chief engineer, or that I have a son who tried to declare me insane to steal my money here. I am just an old man. Enjoying his morning. Enjoying the silence, I opened my laptop earlier to send an email to Evelyn, thanking her for finalizing the last details of the trust. She tells me that the Veterans Housing Project is thriving. The house is full, every bedroom occupied by a man who needed a second chance. Gunnar sent a message through her saying that the boiler is working perfectly, and that they planted a vegetable garden in the backyard right where Tiffany wanted to put a swimming pool, reading that made me smile more than anything else has. In years, I closed the laptop and looked out at the street, watching the people pass by. Young couples holding hands, old men walking their dogs, tourists looking at maps. I feel a lightness in my chest that I haven't felt since Kate died for so long. I carried the weight of my son's expectations, the weight of his failures, the weight of thinking it was my job to fix him simply because we shared the same blood. But sitting here thousands of miles away, I realized the truth. That set me free. Family is not defined by DN. It is not defined by a last name or a birth certificate. Family is defined by respect. It is defined by how you treat each other when the chips are down. And by that definition, I realized I did not lose a family when I walked away from Brandon. I lost a parasite. It is a harsh word, I know, and some of you listening might think I am cold for saying it. You might think a father should sacrifice himself until there is nothing left, but I am here to tell you that you are wrong. Sacrifice without appreciation is just martyrdom. And enabling abuse is not love, it is fear. I loved my son enough to support him for 38 years, but I also loved myself enough to stop him from destroying me. And that is the lesson I want you to take away from my story. If you are holding on to a relationship solely because of blood, even though it drains you, disrespects you, and threatens your well-being, you are not being loyal, you are being a victim. There is no law in the universe that says you have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially when that person is holding the match. I took a sip of my coffee and watched a pigeon land on the pavement, pecking at a crumb of croissant. Life is simple, really. We make it complicated with our guilt and our obligations. But at the end of the day, we all have the right to be safe. We all have the right to the fruits of our own labor. And we all have the right to peace. I am 72 years old, and I am starting over. I have a suitcase of clothes, a modest stipend from my trust, and a whole world left to see. I don't know where I will go next. Maybe Rome, maybe Tokyo, maybe a quiet cabin in the mountains. It doesn't matter because wherever I go, I will be going as a free man. I picked up my pen and wrote one last line in my journal before closing it. The entry was short, just 3 words: project status complete. I paid the waiter and stood up, buttoning my coat against the chill. The city of lights was waiting for me, and I didn't want to miss a single second of it. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it wasn't a fairy tale, and it certainly didn't have the happy ending most people expect where everyone hugs and makes up. But it was a real ending, and sometimes reality is better than fantasy, because it is honest. If my story resonated with you, if you have ever felt used by the people who are supposed to love you, or if you are afraid to draw a line in the sand because you think you owe them something, please remember my empty house. Remember the $145, and remember that the only person you owe your happiness to is yourself. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps this old engineer share his blueprints for survival with more people who might need them. And tell me in the comments below, what is the one thing you have always wanted to do but were too afraid to try? Maybe today is the day you start planning your own escape to Paris. Take care of yourselves, and remember, respect is not given, it is earned. And once it is gone, you have every right to close the account. Until next time, this is Victor Cross signing off.